Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Book Passage. Thank you for coming out and supporting your independent bookstore and these fabulous authors that we are so fortunate to be able to host here in an independent bookstore. So thank you for being here this evening. My name is Melissa Cestaro, and I have the pleasure of introducing the remarkable storyteller and novelist Lauren Groff. Lauren is the New York Times bestselling author of the novels Monsters of Templeton, Arcadia, and the short story collection Delicate Edible Birds. Her stories have been widely recognized and awarded the Penn O. Henry and a Pushcart Prize. Her new novel, Fates and Furies, has been getting a bevy of stunning reviews, including a National Book Award nomination and a selection as our first edition pick here at Book Passage for the month of October. And we are thrilled that this book is being so well received out in the world. It's smart, sexy, literary, sophisticated, and it takes us through the years of a unique marriage that is not what it seems. Lauren, we're honored to have you here at Book Passage this evening. Please join me in welcoming Lauren Groff to Book Passage.
Thank you all for being here. You didn't have to. It's beautiful outside, so I really, really appreciate it. And thank you, Book Passage. You were one of my first stops on my very first book tour for Monsters of Templeton, and I love you. So thank you very, very, very much. And thank you for buying your books from Book Passage, because you're keeping it afloat and happy. So, and that's really, really important. So I'm just going to read a little bit, but I prefer to talk to you because my life is very quiet and I'm somewhat of a hermit. And the book tour is the time when I actually get to speak with people who are not my family and who have a vocabulary over 7 years old. I have 2 little boys, 7 and 4. So I'm going to read, and for those of you who are uncomfortable with sex, earmuffs. Is that okay? Okay, all right, okay. It's the first part of the book. A thick drizzle from the sky, like a curtain sudden sweeping. The seabirds stopped their tuning, the ocean went mute. House lights over the water dimmed to gray. 2 people were coming up the beach. She was fair and sharp in a green bikini, though it was May in Maine and cold. He was tall, vivid. A light flickered in him that caught the eye and held it. Their names were Lotto and Mathilde. For a minute they watched a tide pool full of spiny creatures that sent up curls of sand and vanishing. Then he took her face in his hands, kissed her pale lips. He could die right now of happiness. In a vision, he saw the sea rising up to suck them in, tonguing off their flesh and rolling their bones over its coral molars in the deep. If she was beside him, he thought he would float out singing. Well, he was young, 22, and they had been married that morning in secret. Extravagance under the circumstances could be forgiven. Her fingers down the back of his trunks seared his skin. She pushed him backward, walking him up a dune covered in beach pea stalks, down again to where the wall of sand blocked the wind, where they felt warmer. Under the bikini top, her goose flesh had taken on a lunar blue, and her nipples in the cold turned inward. On their knees now, though the sand was rough and hurt, it didn't matter. They were reduced to mouths and hands. He swept her legs to his hips, pressed her down, blanketed her with his heat until she stopped shivering, made a dune of his back. Her raw knees were raised to the sky. He longed for something wordless and potent, but to wear her. He imagined living in her warmth forever. People in his life had fallen away from him one by one like dominoes. Every movement pinned her further so that she could not abandon him. He imagined a lifetime of screwing on the beach until they were one of those ancient pairs speed-walking in the morning, skin like lacquered walnut meat. Even old, he would waltz her to the dunes and have his way with her sexy frail bird bones, the plastic hips, the bionic knee. Drone lifeguards looming up in the sky, flashing their lights, booming, fornicators, to roust them guiltily out. This for eternity. He closed his eyes and wished. Her eyelashes on his cheek, her thighs on his waist, the first consummation of this terrifying thing they'd done, marriage meant forever. He'd planned for a proper bed, a sense of ceremony. He'd stolen his roommate Samuel's beach house, having spent most summers there since he was 15, knowing they hid the key under the hawksbill turtle carapace in the garden. A house of tartan and liberty print and fiesta ware, thick with dust. The guest room with the lighthouse's triple blink in the night, the craggy beach below. This was what Lotto had imagined for the first time with this gorgeous girl he'd magicked into wife. But Mathilde was right to agitate for plein air consummation. She was always right. He would know this soon enough. It was over too quickly. When she shouted, the gulls hidden by the dune buckshot below clouds. Later, she'd show him the abrasion against her eighth vertebra from a mussel shell when he dug her in and dug her in. They were pressed so close that when they laughed, his laugh rose from her belly, hers from his throat. He kissed her cheekbones, her clavicle, the pale of her wrist with its root-like blue veins. His terrible hunger he thought would be sated was not. The end apparent in the beginning. My wife, he said, mine. Perhaps instead of wearing her, he could swallow her whole. Oh, she said, right. Because I'm chattel. Because my royal family traded me for 3 mules and a bucket of butter. I love your butter bucket, he said. My butter bucket now, so salty, so sweet. Stop, she said. She had lost her smile so shy and constant that he was startled to see her up close without it. Nobody belongs to anybody. We've done something bigger. It's new. He looked at her thoughtfully, gently bit the tip of her nose. He had loved her with all his might these 2 weeks, and in so loving, I considered her transparent, a plate of glass. He could see through to the goodness at her quick. But glass is fragile, you would have to be careful. You're right, he said, thinking how deeply they belonged. How surely. Between his skin and hers, there was the smallest of spaces, barely enough for air, for this slick of sweat now chilling. Even still, a third person, their marriage, that slid in. Okay, thank you. So that's my book. That's the introduction to it. I see someone I really love right now. Hi, Sarah. Great writer. What happens in this book is it's the story of a very happy marriage, because I couldn't think of almost any marriages in literature that are happy, right? I mean, there's one, right, in Anna Karenina, at the very end of the book, with Kitty and Levin, finally, after he acts like a cad through most of it, and, she's a silly person until the end. And then there's Middlemarch, right, at the very, very end again. I mean, it's like, and I don't think that Dorothea's new husband is worth her either. I mean, like, he's just not good enough. So I wanted the challenge of trying to write about a happy partnership. And I wanted to write about other things too under the guise of marriage. So I wanted to think about privilege, and to think about who gets to make art, right? Who gets to claim that space for themselves. And in a way, I'm interested in all of this because I'm deeply ambivalent about marriage myself, even though my marriage was the happiest choice I ever made. I would not have made it had my husband not gotten down on one knee on a Mexican beach with a diamond in his hands. You can't say no, you gotta say yes. It became a good thing in my life, even though I push against it as much as possible. It has a lot of misogyny built into its structure of marriage. But at the same time, I I do feel I owe my husband so much. He's a 60% parent, and I'm the 40% parent, and that's unusual, I know. And he's, he's a good person. So I wanted to think about who supports, a creative person. And I don't necessarily think that I feel guilty about this, but I do feel like he should be acknowledged. So in a way, this book is sort of a nod to him, an apologia to him in a way. So I'm just going to stop there, and I'm going to stop blabbering, and I'm going to take some questions if there are any questions or comments, or we can just dialogue. Yes.
So when you were reading, you embody the characters really well. When you're writing, do you read your work out loud to somebody?
I do, not to someone. No, nobody sees what I'm writing until it's good enough to give to my agent, which is many years in the process. But do you know Charles Dickens always used to make faces in mirrors and sort of turn on his voice? And I laughed at him for many years about that, and then I realized it actually really works. So if you're trying to write dialogue and you can't quite get the people to have an image of a person similar to the person that you're writing about in front of you, and then have a mirror and try to say things the way that this person would say it, it works. It's like method acting, which I think in some ways some aspects of writing are a lot like method acting. You try to get as deep as possible with these people and see what they would say. And I'm still developing. I'm trying to figure out all the tricks in order to make up for my weaknesses. So you did. I was saying this earlier. I think sometimes writing is a process of tricking yourself into being really, really excited about what you're doing, and whatever tricks work. Those are the ones that take you to the end of a book, or take me to an end of the book. So I've developed this arsenal of tricks, and I find it fun. Yeah?
You just said an arsenal of tricks. Can you share?
Sure. Okay, so this is actually somewhat crazy, and I know that I'm being crazy when I do it. But after the planning, the idea boards and the massive quantities of notes that I take. When I sit down to write the book, I do it first drafts very quickly over the course of maybe a month, and then longhand. I write everything longhand, and then I turn it over and I never look at it again, and I start over again. And I do this as many times as necessary until I've actually gotten an idea of the story that I'm telling. And the reason I do this is because I love the sentence, and I love the sentence so much that I would actually prefer to spend months on a single sentence than to think about the deep structural problems inherent in the fiction that I'm writing. So doing this process over and over again, making basically sketches that are terrible, that I know that are terrible, it gives me the freedom to actually be terrible and discover the story. And in a way, it's draft after draft like this in longhand. It's a way of building the story up in almost a three-dimensional printer way. You put a layer on, you put a layer on, you put a layer on. By the end, when you have the layers, you can walk around within the story almost like a little miniature village. And you can sort of knock on this door and open this window and sort of see what's inside the houses. So you've done this enough so that you know the story, you know the characters. And then eventually, after a long time, I sit down and I do the sentences. And that is just the most joyous and pleasurable thing on the planet. But all along, the other thing too is, if I let my anxiety, and I have a lot of anxiety. I mean, anybody who read Arcadia knows that I'm beset by anxiety. If I let my anxiety take over, all the mystery and joy of writing dies, right? So Leonard Cohen has this line that I'm totally going to massacre, but he says, the cracks are the way the light gets in, and I intentionally keep the cracks in the first few years of writing a book very quickly over and over again. So that's one of those tricks. And again, longhand is one of those tricks too, because you're not going like this, you're not pushing the story away as you're writing, as you do with a computer, you're here, you're in it. It's very physical, and I believe in physicality. That's another trick. I have to exercise an hour a day, or else I go crazy and I can't work. So it's just a series of, trial and error, trying to find a way that I need to write this particular thing. Other books, Arcadia, I actually wrote on, originally, the first 2 drafts maybe, I wrote it on index cards. Because what I wanted was to write small, tiny scenes. And that was a way of just physically keeping my scenes very, very small. And of course, my handwriting got very tiny. So I was trying to, it was like a trail of ants that had marched across. And luckily, I didn't want to read it again. I just sort of left it. And I don't read it again because the things that matter are the things that stay in your brain, right? The living details are the ones that remain with you from draft to draft to draft. And I can get seduced by a beautiful image that doesn't matter, right? That doesn't have any emotional weight in it. So, these are my tricks. Everybody has this little grab bag of things that they can do and ways that they have figured out how to write the books that they need to write. Unfortunately, I still have to develop more because with every trick that I have, I find ways to circumvent them. So, yeah.
Thank you, they're quite original.
Oh, thank you. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Tell me what your book says about marriage.
What does my book say about marriage? I'm still ambivalent. What the book says about marriage is a human being within this intimate partnership, which is not necessarily marriage, is not necessarily a stranger to you, but is someone, the inside of whom you will never fully be able to know. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? It's beautiful that we all have our interior life and we have our very small secrets. Just if you think about it, if you travel through the day side by side with your partner, you will never know exactly the way he or she sees a specific scene in which you both are participants. And you'll never know the tiny small rebellions that take place. And if you did know those tiny small rebellions, you'd probably be hurt pretty badly, right? I mean, I sometimes look at just, throwing my husband under the bus, which I do a lot. Sometimes I look at him and I'm like, oh, nose hair, right? And it's gross, but I don't say that because I don't want to hurt him, right? It's just one of those things. That's a tiny small marital rebellion that I keep inside. You gotta keep those inside, right? You can't say everything. So I also resist the therapy mindset where you have to talk everything out. I don't think that's necessarily true or helpful in every case. I think sometimes yes, many times no. And I say this because I come from a combative family. And when we stopped fighting, we got closer. So we learned how to hold things in a little bit. So that's what it says about marriage, I think. But marriage is not what this book is about necessarily. I mean, marriage, and I said this before, probably 18 times, sorry if you've heard this before, but the marriage in this book, like into sort of the casing of a bomb, right? It holds everything in, but it's not what the bomb is about, right? It's just sort of the container. And everything else within this book is, self-mythologizing, right? Mystery, the love, and all these other things that are happening in this book are within that sort of casing. And if you actually looked at the history of the novel, most novels are about marriage. I mean, you can really sort of trace society through the marriage novel. The way that we have changed in the marriage novel, it's just kind of apparent. It's kind of beautiful that way, right? I mean, from the beginning, the first novels, except for Robinson Crusoe, I guess, was, Pamela and Clarissa. I mean, they were basically marriage novels, right? Because in the end, these seduced women became married women. I don't know. Yes, Sarah.
Okay. Okay, so I've heard you talk gloriously about writing in relationship to the world predicament. And then I'm thinking about here's these people caught in their individual,
Yeah.
call it ambivalent predicament. And in the process of writing, sort of how do you engage with this knowledge of where we are and these people you're making up, and how deliberate is that? How much does it come in? What do you like do with these things?
So Sarah's referring to my like dreams of apocalypse all the time. Like, you know, it's just the anxiety dreams, and also the feeling, you know, that there's a huge moral burden that one can choose to take on oneself or not as a human being in this world. So I don't know how to write them directly. I can't write them directly. Because if I did, the book would be really short. And it wouldn't be complicated. It would be a screed as opposed to a novel about characters. So one way that I think of doing it is to give these anxieties to my characters, right? And sort of let the characters express them about the outer world. Particularly my last book, Arcadia, was basically a book about, you know, the end of civilization. But this book, Lotto fears a lot, and he doesn't necessarily express those fears. So characters exist always within a larger social context, and every choice that they have will interact with that social context, right? So it's the minuscule. Yeah, writing a novel, you're writing like 3 billion tiny choices at all times. And so some of these choices, if you just keep your eye always on the things that really, really matter to you, you're going to be writing a novel no matter what that's like canted politically toward the things that really matter most to you as a writer. Yeah, it's all in the minuscule choices, I think. But if you know better how to do it, please tell me. I would love to know. I would love to know how people do it without being, you know, proselytizing or polemical, you know, I don't know, or boring, right? Because like a lot of political fiction is just incredibly boring. Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about the title, how you came upon it and what it signifies?
Yeah. So Fates and Furies, so there are multiple ways that I came on this title. One is just, I love the figures of the Fates and the Furies. Yeah, they're these trios of sisters, and they're goddesses, and the Fates create your destiny, and they measure out your life, and then they cut at the end. And then the Furies are these chthonic goddesses who were spawns when Zeus cut off Cronus' penis and threw it into the ocean, and so they came out of the ocean. So they and their job is to punish malefactors, is to go after people who do terrible, terrible things, like matricides, right? So they go after these, and eventually, over the course of multiple, Greek plays, they're actually tamed by the laws of man, which is really interesting. So one of the things that I was thinking of in this book is. Lotto is someone who believes in his own destiny. He believes he is destined for greatness, and he believes this because everyone around him has always said this, and because he just sees himself as this sort of almost Greek hero in a way, and he self-mythologizes throughout his life that way too. And so he believes in fate, and Mathilde, for reasons that will become obvious to those who have read the book, believes in Furies. But the other thing too is so in the middle of writing a book, I always have these projects, and I have these projects because I think anything that you read enriches the book, no matter what. And some of these projects were, reading Greek drama, and some of the projects were just rereading the Iliad over and over again, like Princess of Freak, which I also. But one of these projects was I wanted to get through every play of Shakespeare's. And I foundered. I did not get through all the history plays. They're not all great. I'm sorry. It's just really, really hard. And I can say that Shakespeare's dead. He's not going to pan my next book. But there's this part in Midsummer Night's Dream with the play within a play, which I love all plays within plays, where Paris and Thisbe do something. I'm not going to be able to quote the line, but it's something about the Fates and Furies, and the lion takes away. You look it up. I wish I could memorize lines. This is why I'm the worst poet on the planet, and went, thankfully, into fiction writing instead of poetry. So there's so many reasons, and over the course of writing a book, you just think about these things obsessively to the point of mild insanity. It also sounds nice. It makes me curious.
I had a question about, you brought up earlier a theme around the book is around privilege.
Yes.
And I was listening you speak about it. It sounds a little bit like, I don't know Lotto yet, but how much do you think privilege factors into their outlook on the Fury versus the Fate, and how much that might reflect into maybe a worldview of the now?
Right. So it was the very nugget of this book in a lot of ways. I live in Florida, and I live in this great little, navy blue town in the middle of this incredibly crimson state, right? I work out with these lovely, lovely people who say just the most egregious things. And some days, I go run an extra 4 miles because I'm like, oh, God, right? And a lot of times, I have to go home, and my husband's the gentlest, kindest person. He's like, they don't understand their privilege, Lauren. You gotta be kind. Because I think that some of the attitudes coming from the people that I work out with in particular come from the fact that they are blind to the fact that so much luck went into giving them the lives that they have. They do not know that being born white in this country is a huge leg up. Being born male in this country is a privilege beyond compare. And so this being able to have free education is something that most human beings over the course of millennia have not had. This is pure golden luck. Being in a country where we ship out our wars elsewhere, that's enormous, right? That's a privilege. So a lot of these privileges are so invisible to who we are as Americans. And I think this feeling of being beset by others is a feeling of not understanding privilege in the way that we have been privileged. And I feel like I'm like a preacher right now, but so having that notion and trying to write a character who has every privilege, but trying to be kind to him and to love him was really like an exercise of empathy that I was not always sure that I wanted to have. I wasn't sure that I wanted to live with him for years. But I do. I love Lotto and I love Mathilde. These are people who have a lot of things. Mathilde less than Lotto, but to be able to see everything, politically, everything about privilege, and then to be able to work into Lotto was one of my challenges in this book. So, thumping this podium.
So where did you grow up and where did you go to school?
I grew up in Cooperstown, New York, which is famous for
Baseball.
But also there's an amazing opera, which nobody knows about, in this beautiful lake. And I went to school at Amherst College, and then did grad school at the University of Wisconsin-Madison because Lauren Moore was working there, and she is just a mega wise genius of the highest order. But at the time, so I worked for a few years at Stanford actually, and was taking some continuing education courses, and had discovered Lauren Moore, and so was writing Lauren Moore stories when I got to Wisconsin, which was so humiliating and awful when I thought about going into her class and giving her this AirStats poor version of her own work, that I started writing very different stories because I couldn't bear to give her those. Which it was good exercise. It was good. Yeah.
Where does your first idea come from for a book? And I'd be curious what like where this story first started?
Oh God, I wish I knew. So the first ideas for books are always buried in other ideas, I think, or in other reading. I think a lot of my ideas come out of just the books I've read, which is a weirdly solipsistic way of talking about writing, right? You know, like, books are bred out of other books in the night. But possibly this book, I don't know, but I think it came out of a reading in a short amount of time of Evan S. Connell's Mr. and Mrs. Bridge and Jane Gardam's Old Philip and the Man in the Wooden Hat, which are both narratives split between his and her stories. And then I thought, oh, that's so funky, you know, like I'm going to do it myself. But I didn't quite know what else I was going to do, or I didn't know the story, I didn't know the character, I think. But it's hard to trace, right? These are ephemeral thoughts that sort of float in and out of your head. I do think sometimes I have ideas for things, and I think, oh, I'm not ready to write that yet. And then I just sort of like chuck it behind my head, and so it like spins in orbit, and I've got like 100 different ideas. And one day, when it falls out of orbit and comes back into my head, I'll be able to write it. It's a very physical idea, books, but I think that's the way it happened. Yeah.
When did you know you wanted to be a writer?
So I thought I was a poet. It was so painful. It was horrible. My poor high school teachers. Like math class, I would give them poems. It was just so tremendously awful. And I look at them, and people actually save them because they were so bad. And they sometimes send them to me, and it's just bad. So I went to college thinking I was a poet. I couldn't get a poem accepted even in the Kansas Literary Magazine over like the first 3 years I was there. Not one. So in despair and absolute love of novels, I was a French and English double major. I took a creative writing class, and then it's like the angels split the clouds and it was when I discovered that I was not Emily Dickinson, unfortunately. So I started writing way early in middle school, I think, and I did it because I had this very aggressive older brother, and it was my space. That was the space that I was able to carve out for myself. Yeah. But we were all nerds, yeah.
Earlier you said you were a hermit, and I wondered, Florida to me seems like a foreign country.
Yeah, me too.
Does that contribute at all to your hermitage? If you lived elsewhere, might you be more?
I don't think so. No, I think my inherent nature is hermit-like, unfortunately. Or fortunately, I don't know. It gets a lot of work done, I guess. I moved to Florida because it was a deal with my husband, right? Like, he took over the family business, and I was able to do writing, which is what I love to do. And I didn't have to teach. I teach only out of sheer pleasure and delight in my students. Because that was the contract. Plus, he was the 60% parent. I put it in way before kids. I feel really proud of myself. But I don't love Florida. I don't hate it anymore. It's a fascinating state. But I also think it's really, really great for a writer not to be too comfortable, right? We have to feel a little bit as if we're on the outside in order to be able to observe things, you know? And I have this group of amazing friends. I'm not like a total hermit. I'm not like an anchorite where people have to like knock on the door to even hear. But I have little children. I don't go out much. That said, the nature in Florida is astonishing, right? Everything wants to kill you. There are alligators, even like the plants, the foliage, and the saw palmettos. You walk in them for 3 seconds, your legs are cut onto blood. It's intense. If you go swimming in, not that anybody would, but if you go swimming in still ponds that are superheated in the summer, there are these little amoebas that go in through your ear canal and start eating your brain. Yeah, it's awesome. It's also incredibly beautiful, right? And there are parts of Florida that are not touched by the condos, or the turquoise fountains, or like the golf carts, and music coming out of speakers. I mean, like, there are places in Florida that are absolutely wild, and the wilderness is so astonishing. I mean, there are these inland rivers that are very cold. They're about 70 degrees, and you can float down inner tubes for miles. And, you know, yeah, you could be eaten by an alligator, but you could take that risk or, you know, chase them off. They're very shy creatures. They don't want to eat you. So you know, it's yeah, I know. It's not the best place on the planet, but for me, it has been the best place to write and to sort of push against really, really hard. And I'm working on a bunch of stories about Florida right now. Yeah.
Where in Florida?
I live in Gainesville, Florida. It's sort of University of Florida. Go Gators. Yes.
Actually, why don't you go ahead?
Okay.
I was going to ask you about how you feel when this book or any of the precursors come along and praise starts rolling in. As a writer, do you tend to embrace it, and do you like that type of spotlight, or would you rather kind of hide in the anonymity of just writing?
I would want to be Elena Ferrante, frankly. She's amazing. She's this incredible Italian novelist who nobody knows who she is. So in total truth, I don't know anything about any praise until people tell me about it, because I don't read any reviews. The only review I read so far for this book has been the New York Times cover, and it's because my husband handed it to me crying. And he's like, you have to read this. So I said, okay, all right, if you're crying, I will read this. But in general, no, it gets in your head, right? I mean, like, and all the negative things that people say get in your head. And it's not that I think that I'm, you know, unable to get better. I want to get better desperately, you know, but I don't want to do it in a public forum. I want to think very deeply about how to become a better writer. I don't want other people imposing that on me in the New York Times, right? So yeah, I just don't listen to it. And on book tour, I spend a lot of time between interviews watching HGTV or reading other books from other people, and it's so beautiful. I mean, we're all here because we love books, right? The transmission of one person's brain into someone else's brain, it's like magic, right? I mean, like nothing else in the history of humanity can do that sort of thing, to put a whole sensibility inside another person. It's so beautiful. So I mean, to sink myself into other people's beautiful books, it's like the biggest pleasure ever. So I don't do anything. I don't care. Right? It's great. It's good. And I do a little dance when people say nice things, but then, you know, I'm still the same hermit, and I still have children who, you know, like pee on the floor still. So, you know, like I have to still make their lunches and be a human being first. So, yeah.
All of your novels are so different. How, and this may be an annoying question, but how autobiographical are each of your novels?
Ooh, what do you think?
I don't know, they're all so different, which seems unusual to me. So
Right.
How you are so creative with them.
Thank you. So my books are all very, very different, and it's for a reason. It's because I push against what I've done in the previous book really, really hard. I don't want to write the same book ever again. Every book is biographical. Every book is also extremely not autobiographical. And it's autobiographical because I have to steal from my life. Otherwise, what else would I steal from? And so I take things from my people and myself. So Lotto is me, and Mathilde's me. Madame Bovary, c'est moi. You know, so Flaubert is right. You know, like she's him because he thought really deeply about her, and she came from him. You know, that's such a cop-out answer. Sorry,
It's a hard one.
I know.
So what modern novelists do you like? What are you reading now?
Yes.
I mean,
Novelists
Elena
or any kind
Ferrante.
of, yeah. Oh, Elena Ferrante.
Have you read all
Actually,
four?
I brought all four and I reread all four. So I have this amazing panel in Brooklyn with the publisher, Michael Reynolds, and her translator, Ann Goldstein. Oh, and I basically said nothing because I was just like bowed down to Ann Goldstein. She's amazing at what she does. So I had to reread everything, and it was just a tremendous pleasure. I actually like them much better read in a short amount of time. Other novelists or other story writers, because the two best books I've read recently have been Joy Williams's The Visiting Privilege. It's her collection of stories throughout her life, but also some new ones. Joy Williams is a wild and crazy genius. I mean, the way that she writes with a scalpel at all times, and you will get hurt. Which is a good thing, it's nice. But she's also really funny, and she's strange. And the other one that I read that sort of blew my head off was Lucia Berlin's Manual for Cleaning Women. Lucia Berlin was this great writer who died in the 90s, and she's raw. And if you read this book, you hear her voice in your ear, and you start to mourn as you're reading the fact that she's not around anymore. You start to mourn her almost as if she's a friend of yours. She's just really astonishing. That's for now. I mean, I can't think of any more. I'm sorry.
You like the Jonathan Franzen?
I have not read it. No. I mean, I love the corrections. I mean, I thought that was a really great book. The reason I haven't read Heaven on Purity yet is just because I read so many things about it. I feel as if I've already read it, which is probably not fair.
There's a kind of intense marriage in there.
Is there? Okay. Yeah. I haven't. So I've heard a lot of great things about A Little Life too, and I have yet to read it. I really would like to read that, but I'm not ready to commit to the pain. Apparently, apparently very painful. Yeah, it's really brutal. Someday. Yeah.
Yeah, we read that.
I'm interested in your thought about your. This is the first book of yours that I'm reading, and I'm only 3 chapters in, and very much enjoying it. And I'm very struck by your language use and your imagery, which is very unique to you, I think. And as I read it, it feels really full of fresh perspective on things, or looking at things in a different way. And I mean, do you attribute that just to the way your brain works, or all that effort to become a poet and kind of concisely, create images, or where does that come from in you? Because I don't read I don't read other people's work that offers me what I'm finding in terms of the freshness of the imagery that I'm finding in yours. I was a field poet. I mean, and I read a lot of poetry, and poets are marvelous in multiple ways. One is they write the best sentences. Their sentences just sing. The other way is they structure things in incredibly interesting ways, and you can learn a lot about form and architecture from poems. But I also write toward different colors, and I know that I'm like, here's one of my secrets. I do. So for instance, a lot of section in this book is a green gold, very Florida-like. So everything is drenched in gold or green. Everything's just sort of vibrant. And Matilda's part, it's more of a gray blue. And it's sort of almost like, I went for a run this morning on the Embarcadero, and it was about dawn, and the sky was a little bit purple, and the bay was just this beautiful, very soft blue, and that was the color I was writing toward. Which I know sounds really strange, but that was sort of the tone. And a lot of people write to music, right? So it's the same sort of idea, where the feelings that these colors evoke in me, that's what I'm writing toward. So I don't know, but I really appreciate you saying that. Thank you. Yeah.
So you have a tremendous love for books and for writing.
Yes.
Your family, your husband, your kids, do they love books the way that you do?
So my husband reads nonfiction.
Does he love nonfiction?
He likes it. Yeah. I think it's really, really good that I married a business person. Because when I give him my books, he's reading it with absolutely unsullied eyes, right? Like if there are tricks that I'm trying to pull, because I've seen them in other books and I don't pull them off, he's always the one who tells me, from the beginning, like, this is ridiculous, I don't understand. Whereas possibly my friends who have read many books would see the reference and like it for that. It makes me a little sad because we don't have, books to talk about, but we can find other people to talk about. My oldest son, he's 7, he loves books beyond good. There are nights when I turn off his light, go downstairs, get this weird feeling that he's up at like 10 in the night and creep upstairs and like pretend to be mad, but he's reading the whole time. You can't really be mad. So he loves books a lot. He does not want to be a writer. I don't know what I did to him, but he doesn't want to be a writer. My 4-year-old can't read yet, but he loves being read to, but he's also a baby in every way. But he makes books for me all the time, and he makes books and he makes me write them, and they're terrible. But someday they'll be better. There's no plot. Characters are one-dimensional. I gotta be really gentle with him right now. My critique has to be very soft. He's learning. So I don't know. I would love to build a dynasty, sort of like the Stephen King dynasty. You know how Stephen King is a writer, Tabitha King is a writer, Joe Hill is one of his sons, and Owen King is a writer. There's only one child, I think, who did not go into writing. I don't want that. I want them to actually do a TV show like Empire on Stephen King family. It's like very laid back, and everybody's like, there's no drama. Yeah,
I was just curious, just more on the personal side that you say you're pushing up against the Florida lifestyle. How do you think you're going to teach your kids to be in that environment and deal with the privilege and the differences that maybe you experienced growing up?
Oh no, we talk about it all the time. They haven't gotten in trouble, but they've gone to school with these little T-shirts I had made up that is like, this is what a feminist looks like. So they're little boys. I love it. It makes me laugh so hard. And the teachers, they're in Montessori school. It's not like, they're fine. But the teacher's like, so some of the parents were asking about that shirt. No, we talk openly about all sorts of things. They listen to NPR, they call it slow talking. But sometimes on NPR there are these terrible stories, and when the church in Charleston happens, they heard the story, and so, I was weeping, right, and I didn't turn it off on time. And so they had asked me, and I actually had to sit them down and be like, this is what happened, and it happened because, and you have to try to contextualize things and be like, you love all of your friends who are black, right? And I know that you don't see, right? So we just talk about a lot of things like that, and it's tough, but I think I hope I'm building strong, smart, feminist, little, anti-privileged, anti-capitalist boys. We'll see.
So I have a lot of ideas that may come out in a coherent question. But one thing I really love about your books is the transportive settings, which I'm sure a lot of it to do with the language and just the beautiful descriptions of things and places. But with Fates and Furies, I'm not that far in yet, but the settings feel like such a strong claustrophobic anxiety. I hope I'm reading that right, because for me that's a big personal anxiety, like the spaces and where you can live and arenas for where you exist. And I was wondering if you had anything to share about setting as a tool.
Yeah, no, setting's a character, right? And not always. Sometimes it's a character that's absent, right? I'm trying to think of an example of that, but I'll come up with one probably tonight in my bed. But setting, in my book, setting as a character, and particularly in Monsters, it is the central character of the book. In Arcadia too, obviously. It's just, you can do so much in so little space with setting. And you can, I think it's called the something fallacy, the fictional fallacy or something, which is placing human emotions on setting, but it's also a really good way to show the way that the characters are thinking at any given moment. So I work really hard on it actually, and a lot of times my husband is the one who tells me when things are right or wrong, because he's much more attuned to it in real life than I am. But I think, are we, yes?
We'll do one more question.
Oh, okay, good, okay. I saw you just appear. And I was like, oh no, I'm wrong.
I was wondering, you talked about privilege. It's interesting in the book. I'm almost done with it. And Lotto, when Matilda comes, supports Lotto.
Yeah.
And I was just wondering that it seems like a little twist to what you're talking about in the book. And it actually kind of made me feel uncomfortable in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So
So I've taken the status of wives, right? And what wives are expected to do. And I think that pushback came from all the biographies of playwrights that I was reading, because the ones that I read were all about male playwrights, and the women sort of fade into the background. But in reality, they were the ones doing the financial stuff, raising the children, like doing these incredibly important jobs that are never really acknowledged. But also, it's replicated in my own life. I mean, my husband's doing these incredibly important jobs that, my name is on this book, but he's a huge partner in building it. It makes me uncomfortable too. There are times that make me uncomfortable too. Just because characters do things that I wouldn't do, it comes from the character's own. I'm trying to phrase this the right way, so I'm not getting anything right. It comes from the character's own self-doubts and flaws and past, if you know what I mean. Okay. Thank you everybody so much.